All right, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about the absolute backbone of our modern lives, the power grid. But here's the thing. As our climate shifts, bringing these more intense storms, crazy heat waves, and floods, that backbone is under some serious unprecedented strain. So today, we're going to explore how we can build a power grid that doesn't just, survive the storm, but actually powers right on through it. I mean, just look at this. This scene is becoming way too familiar, isn't it? We depend on this incredibly complex web of wires for literally everything. Our hospitals, our homes, how we talk to each other, how we do business. And yet a single fallen pole can bring the whole thing crashing down. It really highlights this central paradox. We have this total dependence on a system that is, well, surprisingly fragile. And that really gets to the heart of this whole explainer. When this system fails, it's not just some small inconvenience. No, it's a cascade of consequences. It can impact our health, our safety, our entire economy. So what are we really up against here? What actually happens when the lights go out for good?
To answer that, you first have to understand the new reality our grid is facing. This isn't about one-off incidents anymore. We're talking about a pattern, a new normal that's defined by a huge, dramatic surge in extreme weather events.
And what's wild about this is the sheer scale of the change. This isn't some small uptick. According to the data, and we're talking about information from the EMTDET database here, the number of these extreme weather events has literally quadrupled over the last 50 years. This chart really shows you that trend. What used to be a pretty rare event is now just a regular part of our lives. And the cost of this new normal? It is absolutely staggering. To put a number on it, let's just look at one single event. In September 2024, Hurricane Helene racked up over $55 billion in damages. And that's not just about fixing infrastructure. That number represents lost productivity, broken supply chains, a massive economic disruption. But beyond the money, there's the human cost. And this is what really matters. During that exact same hurricane, 4.7 million people lost power. That is millions of families in the dark, without heat or air conditioning, and possibly cut off from the services they need to survive. So the key takeaway here is this affects real people on a massive, massive scale. So why? Why is our grid so vulnerable to all this? Well, to figure that out, we've got to look at the anatomy of a blackout. It turns out the very way our grid was designed, for a much more stable climate, is exactly what makes it so susceptible to these new, intense threats. The grid is basically a three-part chain. Simple as that. First, you've got generation. That's where power is created at big plants. Then, transmission, where those huge, high-voltage lines carry that power over long distances. And finally, distribution, that local network of smaller lines that brings it right to your house. A break in any single link in this chain, that can trigger a huge, widespread blackout. And the threats we're facing are coming from all angles. It's not just one thing. On the left, you see a solar farm completely flooded. That knocks out generation. On the right, transmission lines just encased in ice, carrying a massive weight they were never built to handle. From wildfires to hurricanes, every single part of the grid has a weak spot. But if we had to pinpoint the absolute weakest link, the data is crystal clear. This quote from a recent IRENA report just says it all. Those sprawling networks of transmission and distribution lines, the T&D system, they are the most exposed and the most frequently damaged parts of the whole system. They are, quite literally, on the front lines of every single storm. Okay, so we've laid out the problem. It's a big one. But now for the exciting part, the solutions. We are seeing a fundamental shift in how people think about this, moving away from just fixing stuff when it breaks and towards building a grid that's smart, adaptable, and resilient from the ground up. And this slide just perfectly captures that change in mindset. The old way? Purely reactive. A storm hits, a line goes down, you send a crew out to fix it. The new approach is all about proactive resilience. That means anticipating the threats and designing a system that can take a punch, adapt on the fly, and get back up quickly. So the first tool in the kit is pretty straightforward. We've got to make our existing stuff tougher. This is all about hardening our assets. We're talking about using stronger poles and towers that can handle higher winds, strategically burying power lines in high-risk areas to shield them from wind and ice, and just, better managing the trees and plants to keep them from falling on the lines during a storm. The second strategy is a total game changer: decentralization. For 100 years, we've relied on a few giant power plants sending electricity across these vast distances. Decentralization completely flips that model on its head. It's about generating power much closer to where it's actually used. Think rooftop solar and local batteries. This drastically cuts our dependence on those long, really vulnerable transmission lines. And here's a perfect example of what that looks like. Rooftop solar panels, generating electricity right where it's needed. When you pair that with a battery, a home or a business can keep the lights on even if the main grid goes down. This creates these little pockets of resilience, of energy independence, which can be absolutely crucial for safeguarding essential services. Now, if you take that idea a step further, you get to the concept of a microgrid. The best way to think about it is like a self-sufficient energy island. It's a local network, maybe for a hospital, a college campus, or even a whole neighborhood, that can work with the main grid. But, and this is the key, it can also disconnect and run completely on its own during an outage, powering all the critical stuff locally. The third part of the toolkit is all about intelligence. Using advanced weather modeling and AI, we can actually predict where a storm is going to hit the hardest and proactively beef up that part of the grid. We can build self-healing networks that act like a digital nervous system, automatically detecting a problem and rerouting power around it in milliseconds, often before you even see the lights flicker. And smart meters? They create a two-way conversation, letting us manage energy flow in real time, making the whole system more stable for everyone. So these solutions aren't science fiction. The tech is here. The final piece of the puzzle then is implementation. How do we take these amazing ideas from the drawing board and make them a reality, on a global scale? Well, it all comes down to smart investments and learning from the people who are already leading the charge. Let's look at a real-world case study. This is Mozambique, a nation that is exceptionally vulnerable to things like cyclones and flooding. The country has been hit with these devastating disasters that have repeatedly just crippled its power sector. For them, resilience isn't some luxury. It's an absolute necessity for survival and for their future. So, in response, Mozambique is rolling out this incredibly comprehensive resilience plan. They're hardening their infrastructure, using stronger poles, raising their substations above flood levels. They're decentralizing by investing in new solar and wind projects. And they're getting smarter by building a new early warning system. It is a textbook example of the entire resilience toolkit in action. Of course, the big question is always money, right? This stuff costs a lot. But we're seeing some really innovative financing models pop up to meet the challenge. It's not just about government spending anymore. We're seeing public-private partnerships, the rise of green and resilience bonds to attract investors, community-funded local projects, and even changes to utility rates that encourage companies to invest in resilience. So, we've looked at the growing threat, we've seen the weak spots in our system, and we've gone through this powerful toolkit of solutions being used all over the world. At the end of the day, a resilient grid means so much more than just keeping the lights on. It means safer hospitals, reliable communication, a more stable economy. And that leaves us with one last question to think about. What are the biggest climate threats where you live, and what would a truly resilient power grid mean for your community?